Recently, after avoiding falling into it, I joined a cult, a church, an enclave of people who don't give themselves a title, but I'm going to call them the Temple of the Baked Tape. It's a very simple little group, only really has one thing in common. They digitize videotapes or audio tapes, and they believe very strongly that you should put tapes into an oven and bake them so that they work better. Please don't run. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I'm fascinated at how there's all these different parts of processes that I do that contain within themselves multitudes of opinions, of camps of thinking, of people having extremely strong opinions on the right way to do things. And some of them have a branding problem. They have a problem explaining why they're a good choice or why they have to be done. Certainly, it's the case with videotape, U-matic, VHS, and all the other formats that I have, that some of them just didn't get stored right. They ended up in basements or attics in a way that caused them to break down a little bit. Beyond that, there is a strong belief in many of these communities that there were tape manufacturers who used processes that have not stood the test of time. For example, Ampex tapes, U-matics from the 1980s, just break down. The glue holding together the tape along with the magnetic material starts to fall apart, and video decks just suffer trying to make them work. They start fluttering, they kick in and out, their sound goes bad. And I would have thought that that was the end of it. The tape is gone. It's broken. It's forever lost. Maybe we'd be lucky and find a long-ago transfer of this tape back when it was alive and young and able to tell its tale. But actually, it turns out there's this reprieve. As affording a process that is mostly lore, there's all sorts of opinions, and mine is just one of them. But what I have found is working is I have purchased an oven, a small oven, usually used for drying out meats. It has 3 shelves on it. Each shelf can hold 2 tapes, so 6 tapes at once. You put a tape in, you set the temperature to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and you leave it simmering for 24 hours. After the 24 hours are over, you let it sit for 24 more hours, and, more often than not, a miracle happens. The video looks crisp. The actual tape rewinds like you would expect it to. The whole thing travels back in time. You then immediately digitize it, and usually within a week or 2, it starts to go back to its old ways. Although some people have mentioned these tapes lasting for a while in this improved space. Tape baking, if you know those words, starts to show up everywhere. People mention that they baked a tape. People mention about tape baking ideas, which ovens they're using, how they're approaching it. It's actually a whole other world down there. And like a lot of these sorts of worlds, there are different factions. Now, some people say that this doesn't actually work. I'll tell you it does. How much it works, how much it affects things, the jury's out on that. But it does work sometimes. I have taken tapes that were 60 minutes long, didn't function, and I have gotten full, complete reads off them. Tapes that I had given up on, put in a corner, and wasn't sure what my next move was going to be, are now digitized and up at the Internet Archive, looking, well, like a tape that's 40 years old, but incredibly good for that time. It is actually working for me. Now, that's an interesting thing, and if you're not in the tape digitization business, I guess it ends there. But I don't think so. I think that this represents to me kind of the lore, the wizardry, the passed on games of telephone that a lot of these disciplines have. There's so many different fiddling parts to digitizing old material that was built in a certain environment with machines that were tuned a certain way and manufacturers who made first-party or fourth-party parts for them. And then decades later, while we're no longer in the absolute springtime of this equipment, there's just enough of a support mechanism, a support group, to have solutions that otherwise would never happen. I'm able to buy new cut rubber that works inside of Sony video machines from 40 years ago. I'm able to find replacement tape parts, and I'm able to use a variety of tools and techniques to make these tapes run one last time. This comes out in a lot of different disciplines. How to make old discs read again, how to deal with CD-ROMs, DVDs, or other machinery. I think that ultimately the goal is the same: rescue lost items. Some of them will be tapes that have been transferred 100 times before. We don't have to worry about them. But every once in a while, I put a tape in, and I realize this is the only copy. There's somebody in there who's famous, or something is happening that is incredibly compelling. And this is it. This is the camera that was standing off to the side while this band performed or this event was happening. This is it. And I have to ensure that it comes out of there as clean as possible. There are a bunch of post-processing tools, of course. AVI Synth comes to mind, dealing with the sparkles and warping and other color problems of VHS tape. It's a little arcane, but it's digital, and it works, and it lets you try again and again to make things look even better. There's no question that solutions come both digital and analog to this material. What matters to me is making it live again and playing a part. At this point, I have transferred thousands of videotapes. Thousands of them have gone up on the Internet Archive or elsewhere. Tapes that probably never expected to be run again, that sat in basements and businesses, were sold off or donated to me. And as I progress through my to-do list, it is so encouraging to know that there is a spell, no matter how controversial, that will cause me to be able to bring these little bits of history back online. Maybe there's spells out there for all sorts of material, and maybe I have a real interest in finding out what those are as well. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Joey Mink, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. There's a little bit more to this story, but it's in a completely different direction. I find that different communities have different, well, let's just say base personalities. The kind of people who transfer tapes can immediately be cleaved into professionals and hobbyist amateurs. The professionals live in their own world. I've met a few. I find them really good people. And because they're working from a job perspective, of they are being paid a good amount of money to do things exactly right, they're the ones with the most distinct tools, repeatable processes, people working with them, repair schedules, everything you expect from an organization that expects to take your money. And then you have hobbyists or amateurs, with a very strong caveat that some of these amateurs are quite past the level of professionals. But they don't possess that sort of weight of having to fulfill a task, an assignment. What they have is a drive, a desire to make things happen. And that drive, that desire, can move them through hundreds of pieces of material that a professional would only do a fraction of, since they weren't getting paid to do them all. I find myself looking at the amount of material I've already gone through and that others go through, and I realize, on one level, these are extremely unprofitable loss leaders of activity. Without a doubt, I will never make back the time spent on the Mark Pines collection, on the Fan Submarine collection, on the Bob Cooper section, and all the other sections that I have. The Mark Pines collection, the Bob Cooper collection, all of the collections that I've been slowly going through. I'm never going to make that back. What I have instead is a feeling of having accomplished and shared the outcome of those projects. They haven't just ended up piled somewhere. These have been important pieces of history to me. Whether it's a 1980 recording of somebody assembling a satellite, or a musical performance from Tina Turner, maybe a collection of people walking the streets in 1992 and interviewing folks, building up historical records in the primary for people to use later. Combined with analytical tools for doing voice recognition and summarization, we end up with a process where things are likely to be found. Far beyond baking a tape to get it better is the fact that this tape is in a wall of tapes, a wall that is building and forming a picture of the past that, in many ways, is so valuable for constructing a useful and objective reality that we can look back on. And that, while never profitable, will be priceless.